Release the Kraken!
Greetings, fellow game designers. Ron here at Lame Duck Studios, and we're going to continue on with our inventory construction. In the last one, we went ahead and made these wonderful widgets, and yeah, so let's go ahead and just dive right in. So let's go into the inventory, and let's go over to the graph here. And we don't need the pre-construct or the event tick. I went ahead and already removed those. We will need the event construct, though. I'm going to keep that in. And the first thing we want to do is set up a listener for our inventory whenever we push the button to open it. So let's go ahead and do a listen for input action. And the action we want is going to be the button we used for our open inventory. So let's go up to Edit, Project Settings here. Let's go down to Input. And let's see, we have jump, primary and secondary action, forward, item forward and item backward, but we don't have an open inventory. Let's go ahead and create an action map here. Call this one open inventory. And then whatever key you want. So a lot of games use the tab key, so we'll do tab. And some games use the I key, so I'll also do the I key. Totally up to you. I'll go ahead and do that. Close out of there, and let's go ahead and just add the key name here. So this is open inventory. Very important that you spell it the same as the way that you did before. So this is going to create a listener so I know it's a bit weird when it comes to how the widget system interacts with the keyboard, because it has the player controller and who communicates to what. So a lot of times when you set it to input mode only, this guy will not listen, or a widget will not listen for input. So to kind of get around that, we're going to set up a listener. And even if we change who the input is going to, this should still work for the most part. We'll go ahead and grab the callback. This is going to be the custom event. This is going to be closed inventory. And if you guys have been keeping tabs with like the dialog box tutorial, same kind of setup. We'll make sure that we hit consume. That way this is the only one that it's listening for. And then next we're going to cast to our player controller. So cast to player controller. And my player controller is this NMC, or not Minecraft player controller. Let me grab that. Now the reason we're casting to our player controller and not the player is all of our controls, if we remember, let's go back to our system, open up the player controller. All of our controls are on our player controller and not the player. So if your controls were on the player, we would cast to the player like we did in the dialog box tutorial. But since it's all on the player controller, we'll cast to it. Make sure we get the player controller. Seems kind of redundant, right? Get player controller. Aha. I don't know why that was at the bottom. You'd think that'd be like right up top. So yeah, it does seem redundant to call the player controller when we're casting to it, because it is of type, but whatever. For this, we do want our specific player controller because we want to disable the input. So first thing, let's go ahead and make sure the mouse is on screen. So set mouse cursor. Set show mouse. There it is. And turn the mouse on. And then we can go ahead and disable input. So disable input. And then the player controller is itself. So both of these become the target. So it turns itself off, and yeah, that's pretty much it there. And then for the close, let's go ahead and grab this. We're just going to duplicate that. Close inventory. Plug that in. Cast to the player controller again. We'll turn the mouse off this time, and we will then enable input. So enable input. Don't forget to plug the player controller in. Okay. Let's go ahead and add the functionality for that. So let's go to the player. Then inside the player here, we just need the begin play. We want to create our widget, so create widget. We're going to store the inventory on the player. So let's go ahead and just make the inventory. And we'll make a variable. So inventory, promote to variable. And this will be inventory. So that'll create a reference to it. Now let's make a custom event. Add custom event. We'll call this open inventory. Let's grab our inventory reference. We want to add this to the viewport, so add to viewport. Oh, and before I plug this in, real quick, make sure that we check to see if it's already in the viewport, because if you open it several times, it'll give you a warning. So let's go ahead and do is in viewport. And we'll branch that. So if it is not in viewport, so if this is false, we will then add it. And we'll go ahead and run this. Compile that, save that. Let's jump over to the player controller here. Let's find a spot we can use. Let's call the open inventory button, which should be the action event, open inventory. And we were going to cast at the player, so we're going to get our player reference. I'm just going to borrow from here. Control W that. We'll do our is valid check to make sure the player exists. And if the player does exist, we are then going to open inventory from the player. Compile that, save that. Let's go ahead and test it. So if I press the tab key, inventory opens. I no longer move. But I cannot get out. Like if I hit tab, my movement is back, but the inventory is still there. So I think we forgot a very important part, which is, we did. So once we're closing the inventory, we want to make sure we're removing it from the screen. So remove from parent. We can label this stuff, so I'll say this, remove from screen. This is going to be turn off mouse. And then enable input. If I can spell. This one can be, listen for inventory key. Turn on mouse. And disable input. So now we can open the inventory and we can close the inventory. Compile it, save it. That's good. Let's go ahead and start building the inventory component. Minimize that. Let's jump into system here. Go ahead to add and then blueprint. Let's go down to actor component. And it's going to be the inventory component. So the inventory component is going to be used for passing the inventory data onto anything. So the player can have it. You can have a chest, a crate or something that has the inventory. So anything that's going to use the inventory and have inventories of different sizes, it can reference the inventory component and then get data from there. So with that, we also want a structure. So we have our block structure. We also want an inventory structure. So go ahead and right-click down here. We'll do blueprints and then a structure. And call this one inventory structure. Go ahead and open that up. Okay, so in here we want a few pieces to define our inventory. So this is going to be the number of columns. That's going to be an integer. Make a new variable. This one's going to be the number of rows. Next, this is going to be the number of slots in the belt. So number of slots in, you can call it belt or hotbar. I think we call it a hotbar. And then we want to have the contents. So this is going to be inventory contents. It's going to be our block structure. And we want this to be an array type. We'll do that again. And we're going to make the hotbar contents. Compile that, save it. Let's jump over to our inventory component. So if you haven't already opened it, let's go down and do the inventory component here. Okay, and then our component is going to have a variable that is going to be the inventory contents. Hit the little drop down, we'll do inventory structure. Hey, compile that. Let's go ahead and remove the tick for now, we don't need that. Off of begin play, the first thing we want to do is, when the game starts, is build the empty inventory. Now if there's going to be stuff in it, then we'll grab that data later on and populate it. But let's go ahead and drag this in. And we also want a for loop. So for loop. And all the way down at the bottom here under flow control, we'll do for loop. Let's go ahead and split the pin on here. So we're going to take the number of columns, we'll do a multiply. So integer times integer. And we'll multiply that by the number of rows here. So what we're doing is getting the total size of our inventory, so that we know exactly how many blocks are going to be in there. So if it's a 10 by 10, then you have an inventory of 100, right? So we want the total size, and this is going to populate that out. But we want to do a -1, so minus integer. And the reason we're doing a -1 is because of array numbering. So arrays always start at 0, and then they go to whatever the maximum is. In our case, if it's from 1 through 100, we want it to be 0 to 99. So our first index is going to be 0, and then our last index will be 99. You could, of course, set this to 1 and then pass this directly in, but as a programmer, I like to keep things with array numbering. So let's go ahead and keep that in there. And then we want to set the array element. So right now, we're just going to set the inventory. So set array element. We can split the pin on that so you can see everything. And we want from a loop body to go there. We want the index to go to index. And everything else can be empty because there's not going to be anything in our array as it's built. So it looks like it's good enough. And then very important down here on the corner, we're going to check size to fit. That way if we add extra pieces to our inventory, you can always readjust it. Okay, I'm going to compile that. Okay, and then I'm going to do a custom event here. We'll call this one rebuild inventory. And what this will do is whenever we have to update the size of our inventory, we can rebuild it. So it'll rerun this. That's all this will do. Because we can't really call this begin play. So all right, compile it, save it. Let's go down for a new spot. This one's going to be a custom event. We'll call this one expand inventory. So to expand our inventory, let's go ahead and add in some inputs here. This will be increase columns by. This will be the integer. We'll add one more. This will be increase rows by. Just drag in our inventory contents here. Split the pin. We'll do a plus integer. We'll get 2 of those, 1 for each. So increase columns by, we'll go to the first one. And then rows will be the second. We will not be increasing our hotbar because our hotbar is always the same. So for that, we're going to take the inventory contents. We'll do a set. We'll expand the pin here. And let's go ahead and plug in the new number of slots for the columns and rows. And then we have the hotbar as well. And then the rest of the data can be passed in. And then our inventory needs to run that, so expand. And then lastly, we will rebuild the inventory. So rebuild inventory. So now whenever we call this expansion, we can rebuild and it'll resize. Okay, let's come down here and let's do another custom event. This one's going to be add item to inventory. Let's grab our inventory contents. Get. Let's go ahead and split the pin. From the inventory contents, we're going to do a for each, but we want to do a for each with break. Grab that. Now the difference between a for each and a for each with break. For each will go through the entire array, and once it gets to the bottom, it's done. Whereas if you add a break, you can tell it, hey, once you find this thing, stop doing your stuff and exit the loop, which is what we want to do. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to actually search through our inventory for the first available empty space. Once we find it, we'll plug an item in there and then we'll exit. So pretty simple. Go ahead and run this. We're going to take from the array element. Let's go ahead and break structure. Expand that. And the simplest way to see if something's in it is to check if any of these are valid. So off of this type here, let's do an equal to. And let's do a none. So if it is equal to none, so branch, then it's empty, right? So if it's equal to none, then it is empty, and then we want to start adding items to the array. So I'm going to drag off of here. Set array element. The index is going to be from this index here. For the item to add, since this is going to be an empty count as it's going through, we need to get the data from somewhere, right? Because this inventory structure is going to have what's already in it. So we want to know what we're getting from who, from where. So from our add to inventory, let's go ahead and add an input. It's going to be item to add. It's going to be our block structure. And we're going to pass this into here. Let's go ahead and collapse this element. So right click on one of the pins, let's do reconstruct. And then let's go ahead and add this one to there. And we don't need to size to fit. In general, the inventory size in Minecraft is always the same. So once it's full, we'll just say no, it won't do anything else. There's a little bit more we want to do to this just to make sure that we're updating the count and everything, but we'll get to that later. So go ahead and just compile. And then back here, we have this break. So once we add an item to the slot, we need to tell it to no longer do that. So let's do a custom event. We'll call this one stop adding items to inventory. Plug it into the break. We want to call this right when this is finished. So right after this is done, we will do stop adding items to inventory. Now you can, of course, drag that wire over. It's just cleaner to not do that. Just visually cleaner. Okay, so we're good there. Go ahead and compile and save. Okay, so now let's go ahead back to the inventory. And let's go ahead and make a new spot here. Let's do a custom event. And this is going to be fill inventory. And we want this to take in a value of the inventory structure. So inventory structure. And I'll change that to contents, just for readability. That's going to take our inventory contents here. Let's go ahead and promote that to a variable. We can expand this. It's one of those nice features about working in version 4.26 is it automatically names it. It's kind of cool. So what we want to know is the size of our inventory. So grab that. We'll do the length. And we'll need 2 of those. So we need our slots. Let's go ahead and add a variable. We'll call this inventory slots. This will be of type slot. So slot, get our slot widget. Let's make this a array. Drag that in. Do a get. So what we're doing here is we're checking as we're building our array, or building our inventory, that it's of a certain size, and that we're not overfilling it. And if we do have more, we can expand it, but, safety checks, So the first one, I'm going to check to see if it's greater than or equal to the number of slots that we have. If it is, then we have to do some stuff. So we're going to do a branch. So from here, let's grab our inventory contents. We'll drag that in. Get. You can split the pin. From the inventory contents, let's go ahead and do a for each. We will not do the one with the break. We'll get the regular one. Okay. So this is if we're going to expand our inventory, then we're going to rebuild it and then update it. And then we need to take the number of columns. -1, and we want to make sure that we're checking to see if this is less than the number of columns. Let's go ahead and add a variable here. Let's do the number of columns. Make that a single type, and it's going to be an integer. And while we're at it, let's do the rows as well. So do a duplicate number of rows. Grab our columns. And if the number of columns is less than the number of columns coming in, we are going to then add them. So we'll do a branch. Let's take our number of columns. Let's do a ++. So increment. Okay, so this is going to step through. So say, hey, how many columns you got? -1, of course, because we're starting at 0. So we want the last index to be 1 less. If the current number of columns is less than whatever is coming in, let's go ahead and add. And then we're going to create a widget. So create widget. And the widget we're going to create will be the slot. So slot. There we go. And then we want to pass in the slot contents, which is going to come out of our array element. Okay. Next, we want to update the slot contents inside of the slots. Let's go over to our slot here. So let's compile this, minimize. Let's go down to widgets. Let's grab our slot, graph, do a custom event. I also want to update slot contents. So grab our slot contents. We'll add a variable. This is going to be slot contents. And make sure it is the correct type. It's going to be our block structure. And let's add this here. Now there's a lot more we have to do to this, but we'll come back to this in just a minute. So we'll save here, jump back to the inventory. From the slot, we want to update slot contents. Okay, we're going to go ahead and leave this one open for the moment. And then we are going to, I'm going to add a child to our grid. And actually our grid's not here. Let's jump back to our design view. Just grab our grid. Just make sure that these are set to variable. So variable, and then the hotbar grid as well, set that to variable. Compile that. Jump over to the graph. There are our grids here. So grid. We'll grab the inventory grid. We'll do add child. And then we want to take our inventory slots here. Let's drag that in. And then what I'm doing here is I'm storing these in a separate array. So this is a bit redundant. You should be able to, off of inventory grid, get child count or children count. And that should give you a number that you can check for back here, right? But I don't like using that. I usually get weird results. So this is a secondary approach where I store them in a second variable. This is a little bit more memory, but I trust this more than I've had experience with trusting this thing. But you're welcome to test it out. This should work the same. I'm just telling you my experience with it. So that's why I'm doing this particular setup. But this is supposed to do what I'm doing here. So I'm going to do add. And then what I'm adding will be this guy right here. We'll do a reroute. And then we're going to run this. So all I'm doing here is creating a separate variable to hold all of the slots. Again, that should be already handled by our inventory grid, and you should be able to get its count from here. And then the other thing is, if you ever want to talk to these individually, I find it's harder to get them out of here to talk to them. So that's why I do this. Even if I never use it, I have access to it. So teach their own, but that should get you the same result. And then the content is going to be the same. So the content is going to be off of here. Plug that in. And then we have our in row and our in column will be our number of columns. We have our number of rows. We can add that in here now. Let's go ahead and set up the rows. Come back over. So once we've finished checking all of our columns, we want to do the rows. So I'll do another branch. So off of false, which means that this is basically run out. So we're going to be on the false now. We're going to take our rows, and we're going to do a less than or equal, less than. And this is going to be the number. I'm going to move this down. Number of rows. Reroute that. And you might be like, well, how come we're not doing a -1 here? And so the reason is, let's jump over into this example here. So normally when you do an inventory system, it's set up as an array grid. So if anybody's done any ordered pairs or had basic algebra at some point in their life, this will look kind of similar. So you have your x and y, x being your horizontal, your y being your vertical. You can see here your ordered pair. So basically what ends up happening is the x position, right here, the first number is always 0, so x and y are both 0, so that goes here. Right? And then we always load the horizontal first. We don't always, but in general, the horizontal first. So the next one would be x1, but y, because we have not moved down, y would remain 0. So y is going to be 0, but x will be 1. And this will kind of repeat across until we get to however far. So if our x is 3, then because we're using array numbering, then what's going to happen is we're going to stop at 2. So we're going to go to, so it's going to be 3 minus 1, right? So 0 plus 1 plus 2 gives us our 3 numerically, but as far as the array is concerned, it's going to be it's going to be 2, right? So 0, 1, 2 is still 3. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wrap. So we're setting our position back to 0, and then our y is going to start adding in. Usually that's how it's done. And you end up with a arrangement kind of like this, right? So the next one down, our x position being the first column. So the first column minus 1 would be 0. And then y is now 1. The next one over is x1 and y1. And x2 and then y2. And you can kind of rinse and repeat this all the way across. I'm just going to kind of drop this in here like so. Right, so this is what you would normally see if you're doing it in code. The issue that we have is instead of having ordered pairs like this, we have a linear number of our total number of inventory contents, or total number of blocks or slots. So what was it? Minecraft usually was it 9 across by 3 down, so it was like 27. So we have to tell this when to wrap, basically. So we're still minusing 1 here, and we're getting to the end. So when we get to 8, we're going to go back to 0, and then we're going to load in our y position. So if you look at the example here, instead of having the ordered pairs, this is being handled internally. We don't get to see this because we're in Blueprint. So we would have the same deal, the x position minus 1, so that's going to get us our 0, and our 1, whoops, kind of broke that, and our 1, and our 2. So we still have a total of 3. And then we're going to wrap back, setting our x position back to 0. So x is going to be 0, but we want the y number because the y number is still counting. So it went from 0 to 1 to 2, but y at this point is going to be 3, and then our x is going to be 0. You follow me? And then our x will then be 1, but our y will be 4. And then our x will then be 2, but our y will be 5. We're basically taking a linear line of numbers and offsetting the position by 1, basically, using our x as our starting point. So at the end of the day, we end up with a grid that looks something like this. So coming over, we'll go ahead and check this. Then we'll take our number of rows. We're going to do a plus plus, so increment. We're going to set our number of columns back to 0. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to create this widget. Let's go ahead and make some room here. So that should create the rows in our inventory if we compile and save. And then off of the false branch here, so in the event our inventory is the same size, we don't want to rebuild it, but we do want to check what's in it. So we're going to grab our inventory contents again, split that, and we'll do a for each. We'll run this off the false here. We're going to get our inventory slots here. And this is what I was talking about earlier, about how it's easier to get all the slots from our stored variable than it is to get them from the inventory grid. I just find it easier to do this than this one. So that's just me. Off of here, we'll do a get. Run that through. And then off of this, we're going to do update slot contents. Yeah. And we can pass in these slot contents. Compile it, save it. Let's go ahead and finish this function here. So we'll jump in. This is on our slot contents. So if we go to our slot contents, we have this. Okay. It's going to come over and do a branch. I get my contents here. I'll do a get, split that. And you can do that off of here. That's fine. Same thing, we're going to compare to see if there's anything in it. So I'm going to do, in this case, I'm going to do a not equal to. So not equal. We'll do a none. So if it's not equal to none, that means it's full. And the reason why I did this is just so I can have my true on top. Over here, we want to do a set brush. So I'm going to come down to the item, drag that in, get, set brush. And we'll open the brush up. We want to take the image out of here. So if we're not empty, then we want to take the image. Bam. Okay. But we do want to take the contents of, so take our item here. Let's do a get brush. Split that. And we want to pass in all of the default values. We're going to leave the brush image as this one. And then everything else. Pass in. We then want to set the visibility of the brush, so drag this out, of the item, set visibility. We'll set this to non-hit testable for self and children. That way the item, the image isn't clickable. We don't want that to happen. And then we also want to update the count, so get our item count. We'll get item count. We want this to also be visible. Yeah, so we want this to be non-hit testable as well. Pass this in. Now you could use the same one. There's no real harm in doing that, but we want to make sure that this only gets shown if it's more than one. So off of here, let's go down to our item count. Drag that in. We'll do greater than or equal to. And if it's a count of 1, we're gonna not say it. We're gonna assume that's redundant. But if it's greater than or equal to 2, we'll then show it. So we'll branch that. And then we'll update our item count. So set text. And then the text is going to be off of here. So let's do our reroute node. Pass that in. Okay, so that's the first part. Let's come back here. If, however, it is empty, we want to still create the slot. We want to make sure that it is, in fact, empty. So let's go up to top here. Take our event construct. Let's drag in our item. We'll do a get brush. Let's pass in the default of this into our empty slot here. So we'll say set default item contents. Let's come back over, and then off of the false, we are also going to set brush. I'll just go ahead and duplicate that. I can close these pins here, so reconstruct. We want the item to be the target. We'll run the false to the set brush. And then the in brush is going to be the empty slot. And we want to make sure we set the visibility. So I'll grab the visibility. Make this to be hidden. And we're going to hide pretty much everything that we don't need. So we won't need to see the item, because it'll be an empty slot, and we don't need the item count. All right, compile that, save it. All right, let's go ahead and jump back to our player. So we have this, and we have that. Okay, let's go ahead and move some stuff around. So we're just about ready to have this show to the screen. We want to make sure, as we are setting this, that once the inventory is created for the first time, we still need to make sure that it does get populated, at least with nothing. At some point, we'll actually pass in inventory data. But for now, we'll go ahead and add our inventory component. So inventory component. We'll drag that in. Let's get our inventory contents here. And then from here, we'll do fill inventory. Oops, come here, you. Okay. So we'll call this pre-build. Okay. And then down here, we want to do a rebuild. So whenever we go to open this, we want to grab our inventory widget. We'll do a fill inventory. Pass that in. And then the contents will once again come from our inventory components. Inventory contents. Okay. Compile that, save that. Let's see what happens when we open it. Nothing yet. You know what? We never set our inventory structure, or our inventory component here. Grab that. And then over here under default, open that up. Currently it's set to 0. Let's go ahead and do, I don't know, 5 and 5. We don't have our hotbar yet, so let's just go ahead and see if this loads. Hey, we have inventories. Not quite where I want everything to be, but close enough. I think the default is 9 and 3. Does that get us better? I don't know why this guy's being on the bottom. That's weird. So, you know what I think I did? We jump back into our inventory. Where we go? Here. What do we do our default values as? 0. Okay. So our number of columns needs to be a -1. Let's go ahead and do that. There we go. Correct size. Yay. Now you do see that these are already highlighted. We want to turn the highlights and stuff off. So right off the beginning, jump over to the inventory slot here. And we can do this up here. You know, we can set them all to hidden. I'm going to set pretty much the default of these to be hidden. So this one, come down, visibility, we will do hidden. This one, hidden. And you can grab multiple and do the same thing. So go down to behavior and visibility, hidden. Hey, our inventory is there. It is a bit to the edge, so what we can do to get rid of that is jump into the inventory, back to design view. Right now we have our overlay, and it is set to size the content. Let's go ahead and put a padding on our inventory grid here. So grid, let's go up to a padding. I'll do a left, maybe 30, and a right 30. And you know, oh, I put the padding in the wrong spot. Inventory grid can be 0. Set it to 0. And then we'll do the, because we're inside a scroll box here, we'll do the scroll box padding. 30, and then 30 on the right. Okay, and let's go ahead and do our background. Yeah, we want to make sure that this is, at the very least, horizontal width expansion. That should fix that. Hey, there we go. Now we have our slots. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call the video here. On the next one, we'll look at how to actually add the items to the inventory and update it as we go. All right, stay tuned, and I shall see you next time. Hey guys, thanks for checking out the channel. Misty and I both thank you. If you enjoyed that video you just watched, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, I'm getting into NFTs. Those are big these days. I was thinking about creating my own coin, but we'll get into that at a later date. But NFTs are pretty hot right now. I'm converting my artwork to NFTs. You can see my Rarible page right here. Well, I got 4 items, but I'm adding one as they go. They're not cheap to make, so gotta make them as they go. If you want to support the channel other ways, of course, there's Lame Duck Studios merch, which you can see right here on my Teespring store, as well as Amazon. Speaking of Amazon, I have my books up there under Bruce RF, which is my pen name. Life and Times of Donna Martin, as well as the Guardian's Path of Ascension. You can flip through those and see the reviews, and grab a copy, read it, tell me what you think. It helps me out as an author. It also helps me out as, everything goes back into the stuff that I'm doing. So more content for you. If you want to keep up with me throughout the day, or just kind of see what's going on in life, hit me up on Twitter under BruceRF1. Again, that is my pen name. If you want to see what's going on my blog, ronflowersjr.me, you can see what I'm writing about, what else is going on in life, difficulties that I have with my projects that I'm working on. A lot of my devlog stuff kind of goes there before it comes here, so it's another way of kind of getting into that. I do also have a Patreon where I release content early if you want to get access to things ahead of time, because most of the stuff I produce, I do things on Sundays and I post on Wednesdays most often, but it goes to Patreon first, so it's kind of there usually a week or so ahead of time, and then it has a release schedule. So if you want to see things early, go there. Let's see, what else is going on? You can also follow me on Facebook under you can do the Lame Duck Studios Facebook or the Bruce RF Facebook. Both of those are available, and a lot of these links are down in the description, so if you want to just hit those up and just click on them and follow them through, that's another way of getting there. Also, we're at 1,300 subscribers. Woo! We're this close to 10,000, but small milestones first. Let's get to 2,000 subscribers, and then we will continue our road building toward that 10,000 milestone. That is going to be pretty awesome for this channel, my humble channel. So yeah, that's all I have for you on this outro. It's a bit of a long one, but a lot of stuff going on. Anyways, stay tuned, and I shall see you next time.